Okay, I think that's long enough. We can probably jump in and get started. So, hello again, everyone, and welcome to the basics of audience targeting with Programmatic. Just a quick introduction before we do jump into everything. My name's David. I'm a manager of client services here at StackAdapt. I've been with the company for about 4 years in a couple different roles. And I have done a couple webinars in the past. So for everyone I've met before, it's great to see you again. And those that are new, welcome.
It's good to have everybody join. My name is Karen. I'm also a manager of client services at StackAdapt. I've been at the company for almost 2 years, working as an account manager and now manager of client services. It's really great to see everybody.
Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Just so everyone is aware, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with everybody shortly after the presentation. So although I'm sure you're all going to be taking vigorous notes, make sure we're focusing on the content, and you can always circle back if there's pieces you missed. We're also going to have some time at the very end to field some questions from everybody. So feel free to place those within the queue at the GoToWebinar panel. We'll address everything at the end, but please throughout, make sure you put your questions in there so we can get through everything as promptly and quickly as possible when we get to that point. Okay, cool. So let's jump into it. I'm going to just start with the basics. For those of you that are a little bit newer to the world of programmatic and may not be aware, StackAdapt is a DSP. What is a DSP, you may ask? A DSP is a platform used by digital marketers, state-of-the-art platform where some of the most progressive work in machine learning meets cutting-edge user experience. Ad buyers plan, execute, and manage data-driven advertising through the platform all in one place. Or if you're going to explain it to your parents or your grandparents a little bit more simply, the main function of a DSP is to allow buyers to purchase digital ad space online from multiple publishers, adding on multiple layers of data all through one specific interface. Going to the agenda today, we only have about 3 main items we want to run through, trying to keep targeting an audience as simple as possible, which really is a good segue into the start here. We're going to set the stage for your audience. Within this section, we're going to deliver a little bit of an overview of some of the key ways that you're able to target, identify your right audience, and just learn a little bit more better ways to define which specific buying signals you should be paying attention to when you are prepping for your campaign. Next, we're going to do the different types of targeting tactics. This is where we're going to do a deep dive into a number of the more popular targeting capabilities that the programmatic industry has to offer, but also just a general overview of a little bit more niche targeting tactics as well. The idea here is to just have you have the sense of maybe which targeting options could work a little bit better for you, but also on the other end, maybe some that you haven't been aware of, you can test out in the coming months. And then at the very end, we have a case study, just some examples of how me and Karen like to use a lot of the more popular targeting tactics, and just some examples of where we've seen success with them in the past. Okay, setting the stage. Just like every successful and great wedding speech, commencement address, and webinar, we're going to start off with a little description or a little quote here. It's a hard time to be a performance marketer. It feels like the chessboard gets flipped over every now and again, and you just need to adjust. This obviously referencing a lot of the different changes that have taken place within the programmatic landscape over the last couple of years, mainly the heightened user privacy legislations that has been put in place. This has largely disrupted the way in which we can use people's data, which of course plays a large part in how we target users and how we target specific audiences. We want to start with this quote as it's likely that if we were going to do this webinar, say in another 6 months to 12 months, some of the different targeting tactics may be called different. Some of the strategies may be a little different. So we want to set that groundwork at the very beginning. But having said that, as of today, we're still able to leverage and take advantage of a lot of different micro-targeting capabilities that the industry was really built on and where the industry has really seen success. And these are the ones that are going to be the most impactful to you. So again, things are going to be changing within the next 6 months, but a lot of the tactics we're going to go through today are tried and true and are definitely the most impactful. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Karen and we can get started with section 1.
Thanks, David. I couldn't agree more. The recent focus on heightened user privacy, permissions, and how we leverage data, it's really added a new color to the landscape. As David said, one of the strengths of programmatic and this ad tech space is the micro-targeting capabilities, the fact that you can get really granular, both with targeting and with measurement. But before you target someone with an ad or with a message, you need to know what resonates with them. And this is why personalization is really key. And personalization is nothing new. It's not something advertisers came up with. It's existed in the world for many, many years in all spaces, in advertising, as business, in politics, and so on. Allow me to digress for a quick 10 seconds. I'm a fan of history and literature, hence this tangent. But in ancient Greece, a philosopher named Aristotle, you may have heard of him, he actually wrote about personalization. He said, and I quote, "Things which are akin and like are always pleasant to one another, and every person in the highest degree feels this in regard to themselves." Essentially, what he was saying was people like themselves and people like their choices. So personalization really speaks to them. What that means for us as marketers is that we need to pay close attention to the audience and how we can personalize what we're saying to them for them. Personalization drives response, and having a holistic view of your customer is the first step in identifying their needs and their choices. How do you define your audience? Before I can personalize something for you, I need some idea of who you are, of what you like, what your choices are. So how do you define your audience? Let's start easy. Let's start simple. Who is the person that buys your product or signs up for your service or calls your business or recommends your business to a friend, leading to that great word of mouth marketing? If you already have identified personas for your target audience, you're way ahead of me. You've already asked yourself these questions. But if you haven't identified the personas of your target audience, this is a good place to start. You can start easy. Start thinking about demographics. You can start with gender, age, perhaps income brackets of the people that might be interested in your business, the geography, where they reside, their interests and intents, and then make your way to the complex stuff, their behaviors, what captures their attention, what gets them hooked. And then we can extrapolate that into the messaging that we'll put in front of them. Once we've started to identify and define the audience, how do we reach this audience? In programmatic, you have the advantage of what David called micro-targeting capabilities. You really can hone in on your target audience through very specific criteria. But how does technology allow for that granular targeting? Well, it's through these identifiers on this chart. On the left, you can see audience defining data that is available to you to leverage. For example, I can target someone, I can show them a message based on their historic behavior, their geolocation, their address, and so on. This data can be probabilistic or deterministic based on its statistical significance and how valid it is. On the right, there is a list of commonly used identifiers for these people. How does an advertiser know what my behaviors are? How do they know who Karen is? What my choices are? How do they know what movie tickets I bought yesterday? Well, they know it through the identifiers on the right. These identifiers, like cookies or device IDs or IP addresses or anything else that I may have consented to share. So through those identifiers, I've built myself an identity graph of my own choices and behaviors. All these identifiers combined paint a decent picture of who I am and what my preferences are. So based on that, an advertiser or a brand can choose to target me with the messaging that's personal to me. I want to give a throwback to programmatic in the early days and just how far we've come. How did this technology come about? I won't go back into the super early days of programmatic, but I do want to highlight how far we've come. Back in 2009, when ad tech was on the rise, retargeting, which we'll speak about later in this webinar, was an emerging concept. Today, it's really common and popular to use retargeting, especially in digital advertising, when you can reach back out to audiences that have previously shown interest in your brand by visiting your website or something else. These people who carry brand recognition, who've seen your site, who might potentially want to buy something on your site or sign up for a newsletter or take an action, is a great audience to retarget. I'll revisit retargeting in a bit, but I thought this was a great throwback to share with you. Now that we had our throwback, let's look at the future. The future of targeting lies between artificial intelligence and machine learning. Today, targeting is very sophisticated, and you'll get a sneak peek of the different targeting tactics that you can leverage and how sophisticated they actually are. They really allow for granular personalization and detailed measurement. This is possible because of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And this is where the future lies. The future, in fact, has taken root in the present because we are using these tools today. For example, StackAdapt's artificial intelligence applies machine learning to every single campaign you run within the platform. So not only can you get really specific with who you want to target, but the same artificial intelligence also makes optimizations for you. So the longer the campaign runs, the more it's optimized and the more successful it is. On the right is a simple example of how you can really drill down on specific targeting. In this example, say, you can target people reading about sneezing, itchy eyes, hives, or antihistamines. And you can keep these 4 layers as separate targeting parameters. It can get that specific. I'll pass it on to David to chat about different types of targeting tactics for a bit.
Thanks, Karen. Great segue. The different types of targeting tactics. So we'll dive into those in just a second. But before we do jump into it, one thing I really want to emphasize before we go through all of these, because there's going to be a lot of them, is that it's extremely important to include multiple targeting types within your marketing plan. Very similar to how each channel type that we run programmatically has its strengths and weaknesses, so too does audiences. For example, video is really great for telling complex, emotional stories, and it's a perfect thing for brand building. This could probably said the same thing for something like a browsing audience or somebody who's showed interest in a specific topic. Probably is a good indicator that we can take advantage of this interest with a lot more of a branding campaign. Native, it's amazing for selling brands with an interesting educational and some sort of educational story. This can probably be said the same for something like a contextual targeting option or contextually targeting an audience where they're actually in real time reading about something that's interesting to them. It's a really good way to tell an interesting story between a brand and a topic. Or lastly, just one more example, something like display, it's more of that workhorse of your marketing funnel. This would be very similar to retargeting or dynamic retargeting. This is really going to be used to lift your performance across all other channels. So these are the types of ways in which you should be thinking about the different targeting topics before we jump into it. And I really do encourage everyone as we're listening to try to think creatively over the next couple of months how you can get a sense of how these will work for your advertisers. And hopefully you're able to come up with some ideas. But yes, let's start off with all the different ways, the multitude of ways we can target with programmatic. Looking at this list, it's pretty daunting. But when we start to review, get a little bit more granular, you can start to sense some patterns and things make a little bit more sense. And also things become a little bit more or seem a little bit more accessible when we dive a little bit deeper into it. For example, our retargeting audiences that we're listing on here, our lookalike audience that we're listing on here, a lot of these things can be, or a lot of this information even though you may not have it already, can be gathered through the use of a pixel. So one major way in order to enhance your targeting capabilities right off the bat is to place a pixel or piece of code that helps develop and build these audiences for you. Also, taking a look at something like weather targeting or location-based targeting, this is a good example of a non-traditional signal or micro-targeting level, whereas we can actually reach a user depending on the weather, depending on where they are, and this may really drastically change their mood, their aptitude for listening to something, watching something, reading about something, or potentially making that purchase that a lot of us are striving towards. When you understand what you can do with audience targeting, you'll understand how to layer tactics on effectively. And with that, I will pass it on to Karen to dive into a little bit more about first-party targeting specifically.
Thanks, David. First-party targeting, first-party data, is any data that you have collected and have ownership of. For example, if you run an online newsletter, say you email your customers once a week with a newsletter for your brand, and you allow people to opt in for that newsletter, then the information they share with you when signing up for that newsletter is your first-party data. Similarly, a list of your existing customers, say you have their emails or their phone numbers or their physical addresses that they've provided to you, that can become your CRM list, also your first-party data. One of the targeting tactics that can help you reach existing customers who are on that CRM list is through leveraging that first-party data. Within StackAdapt, you can upload your first-party data lists and then target those users. You can even expand this existing list into a lookalike of new users who you can also target, who might potentially become customers one day. A specific use of first-party data is retargeting. The data that a pixel which is placed on your website collects for you also falls under first-party data. For example, if you place a StackAdapt pixel on your website and a user consents to the use of cookies on your website, once they visit the site, they will be collected into a pool of site visitors. You can then run a retargeting campaign in StackAdapt to reach these users with ads. You know these people have been on your website, they've browsed the website, so they have brand recognition and they are interested in your product or service. So it makes sense to target them with some kind of messaging. Retargeting is an excellent tactic when you strategically leverage it. For example, in targeting people who've been to the website, you can also exclude people who've already made a purchase or already signed up for a newsletter. So the people you left targeting are people who are net new to your site, who haven't taken an action yet, but they are interested. Some other strategic uses of retargeting are listed here on the left. The example I just gave was of site visitor retargeting. Other uses can be dynamic retargeting. Say you show the ad of the last product you saw, or video retargeting, where you show an ad if somebody's previously seen a video about your brand, and so on. Lookalike audiences. Say you want to use retargeting, but your site traffic is too low. There's not a lot of people that go to your website. You might be a smaller brand or a newer site. Therefore, the pool of users in that retargeting segment is quite small and you're unable to scale it. This is where you can use lookalike. Lookalike is an excellent way to cast a wider net. Within StackAdapt, we can build lookalike audiences based off any pre-existing audience. For example, say you have about 5,000 site visitors a month. We can collect those people in a retargeting pool, but we can also build a lookalike based on that pool. So you'll build a larger audience pool who have similar interests and demographics to those 5,000 people and reach them on a campaign with us. This allows you to reach new audiences who are similar to your existing customers or existing people who carry that brand recognition, and therefore expand your customer base in the future. Moving away from first party, while first party data was data you collect and own, third party data is data collected and owned by other organizations, but it's made available to you. For example, LiveRamp, Nielsen, Newstar, these are organizations that own third-party data that they provide to advertisers like yourself to leverage in campaigns. In StackAdapt, our third-party data is consolidated into a third-party catalog, available to you to access from our audiences page. Simply, this catalog acts like a lookbook to browse over 150,000 available audience segments, which are on our platform and ready to go. So within this wide range of audiences, you can imagine it gets really granular. So all you have to do is search for an audience, and it might be available to you ready to go in a third-party catalog. David, I'll pass it on to you to talk about custom segments.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll jump into that just in 1 second. I wanted to add one more point on the third-party targeting. Within our platform, as Karen said, we do have that lookbook of audiences. And one thing you can do within that tab is filter by audience provider. I think this is something that some advertisers overlook when they are building out their marketing plan or planning their campaigns. There's a number of different providers out there, and they gather data in a lot of different ways. Thinking back to what Karen was touching on in our first section about probabilistic versus deterministic data, these are the types of things that you should be testing when you're looking at third-party targeting option. For example, the provider, we can enlist some audiences from Visa and MasterCard, for example, based off of people's purchase history. There's also a lot more vertical specific data providers such as Bombora, Dun & Bradstreet, who are really strong within the B2B space. So if you're ever looking to generate leads for a client or target specific people within an organization, these are just types of data providers that specialize in that, and they have the data to back up what they're looking to target. So another really important thing to consider when you're looking at third-party audiences or data that you may not have access to or be able to generate on your own. Okay, cool. Let's jump into StackAdapt custom segments. StackAdapt custom segments, this is a more proprietary piece of targeting that you're able to leverage through StackAdapt. And within custom segment umbrella, there's a number of different ways in which you can build an audience. For instance, within a custom segment within our platform, you can build a location-based audience. So based on where people are located at a specific time, at a specific place, you can gather those users into an audience pool, allow it to grow, and in almost real time, start to target those users either later that day, the next day, so on and so forth. A good example of this would be if you are an athletic apparel company that wants to target people that are fans of sports, you can create an audience with a radius around sports facilities within a specific town, specific city, even the state, if you have access to that data. And then from there, you know people that are targeting these areas frequently are most likely know someone or are people that are interested in sports. It's a really good one-to-one targeting tactic. Another option within custom segments, you can see them all listed here on the left, would be targeting people based off of their internet service provider. This is a really good one, I think, if you are maybe targeting a specific or advertising for a specific telecom company, and you want to target people that are on maybe a competitor service. You can target people that are on those service that you'd love to gather users from or take more people from. Also, another good one is if you want to target people that maybe attend a specific university, allowing us to gather within a custom segment people that are attached to a specific IP address really helps, or is a really good way of determining where a person is and what maybe their interests lie in. Another really powerful tool within our custom segments is the ability to intersect segments together. So maybe you have a couple of data providers that you really like, maybe two third-party ones, but you can't find one that's just niche enough for your specific person you want to target. Let's start with maybe you're a hiking shoe company and you want to target people that are very interested in hiking, but they're also interested in adventure travel or outdoor activities. You can intersect them together, and then whatever users that fall into both, we can then go ahead and target. It's a very, very powerful strategy, and it's where you start developing these a little bit more diverse targeting capabilities. All these are really powerful methods, like I just said, And the majority of these can be leveraged within StackAdapt's audience tab, and you can build them on a self-serve basis, scale them out, see if they grow to a size in which you're comfortable adding them as a specific layered onto one campaign, or you can group some together, so on and so forth. Next is Page Context AI. So this is bringing back some old school targeting, but now with a much more sophisticated machine learning approach. Contextual advertising tailors ads to the environment in which a user is browsing. And since these ads are served based off of the interests of the user, we find that they're hyper relevant, tapping to users' current frame of mind. So associating your brand with a really great topic can lead to some really strong results. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on the bullet points on the left-hand side, because I think this is specifically with what I was talking to earlier with some of the privacy changes that we've seen within the industry is going to be a very hot topic within the coming months and years. So let's start with some of the benefits about PCAI. Obviously, it protects the user's privacy because you're not gathering or leveraging any sort of pre-existing data sets. It's all right within real time. It allows you to target niche contexts. So each brand is truly unique. So the ability to target customized context is essential to marketers, especially those who require some sort of niche targeting. The next, I think a big piece here is transparency in real-time feedback. So while many contextual solutions are a little bit of a black box, Page Context AI allows you to verify your ads served on relevant domains pre and post flight. So you actually have that transparency to know that you're serving on the most contextually relevant sites. And then also just from a performance standpoint, specifically on StackAdapt, we do a really good job of balancing targeting relevancy versus scale in real time. This is where that machine learning comes into play. It's very unique, and I think it cannot be understated enough, the ability to measure that relevancy and performance all at once. One quick tip for those who have not tested it out yet, I would recommend to test out a couple of different contexts at one time, and try not to set an arbitrary budget, typically for PCAI, because newbies typically are pretty surprised with the results. And typically, I always say, allow your results to tell you where your budget should be going. Okay, one of our last targeting audiences that we're going to highlight is weather targeting. So weather targeting is one of those rare opportunities within the programmatic landscape, whereas you get to leverage external buying signal or a non-traditional digital buying signal and serve ads in real time. It's very similar if you think about the concept of within retail stores, a lot of larger box stores set up their merchandise based on a number of different external factors, such as even the color of the store, the direction people usually take when they enter into big box stores. All of this stuff is being considered just based off of people's mood. Weather targeting lets you target users based on their setting in real time. A lot of studies show that weather impacts people just the seasonality of certain products, but people's moods, which affect how they shop. By understanding the correlation between weather and purchasing patterns, you can really make a large impact on your audience. So next time you're in a creative brainstorming meeting, I highly recommend to discuss with your team about your specific product, how it may be perceived in a certain season or during a specific weather pattern, and maybe make some mock-ups to see if you can get some creative ideas on how to leverage this targeting tactic properly. Okay, cool. Let's jump into the case studies and just some examples, our last section of the webinar. Okay, so for contextual targeting, I just talked about this, but it's really successful across all stages of the funnel. I know upper, lower, and middle. I always recommend, as I've said many times, to test it out, but we've seen a lot of success for companies such as insurance providers. You can place your ad while people are actually reading about top policies and best practices when purchasing insurance. So again, they're in that mindset and you're serving them an ad that is hyper relevant to them. Another really cool option is using PCAI while people are browsing about specific life events. There's often a very good correlation or causation between people maybe purchasing their first home or people moving in together and them updating or adjusting their insurance. So again, that real time getting creative with how we want to target individuals within a specific mindset can be very impactful, and we've seen success with it. Another big one here, third-party targeting, best used for upper to mid-funnel. A good example is financial institutions. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but you can actually target people, decision makers within small, medium-sized businesses, for example. So you can target people based off their job title. Very, very niche way of executing users, and a lot of times these types of people are very hard to get in front of. So a very, very underrated way of leveraging third-party targeting. Another big option here, and this kind of dates back to what Karen was talking about, but being able to actually exclude current customers also allows your money to go farther. So you're using a couple of different tactics at once, but primarily obviously being the third-party tactic here.
Perfect. Thanks, David. For first-party targeting, we've talked about retargeting in previous slides, but let's take an example. Let's consider a B2C brand, say in retail. So retargeting here is commonly used for mid or lower funnel campaigns aiming to drive conversions. In this example, say you're a retail brand or you own a store on Shopify and you're wanting to drive online sales or purchases. Because you are targeting site visitors with retargeting, you know that this person has been to the website, they've probably browsed the website, looked at certain products, and is interested. Now it's up to your ad messaging to drive them to make a purchase. So perhaps the ad shows an incentive or a sale or a discount that the user can take, and it'll also create a sense of urgency for them to make that purchase. You can take this one step further. This retail brand, while they can target site visitors, like David said, they can exclude existing customers. So we can also upload a CRM list into StackAdapt and set that as an exclusion audience on your retargeting campaign. So you're spending all your ad dollars on reaching new potential customers and not existing ones. The other example on the right here is for custom segments. Say you are a financial institution, perhaps a bank, wanting to reach people that are looking to buy a home and are in need for a mortgage. With StackAdapt, we can create specific custom segments that hone in on those people. We can also intersect the segment with people who've recently visited a banking location physically. So you have that extra layer of assurance that this person is in market to buy a home, and they're actually visiting banks personally to talk to agents and talk about mortgages. That covers example scenarios. David, let's move on to the wrap up. Perfect. I can cover the first two here. To wrap this webinar up, we'd like to highlight some points that we covered, specifically that programmatic targeting is enhanced by machine learning and AI. So if you're using a platform, make sure that that is embedded within the foundation of that platform, similar to StackAdapt, because it really helps optimize your campaigns over time and do a lot of the smart thinking for you. Ensure that you are up to speed with how you can identify and reach your audience. If you've built personas for your audience segments, your audience target, great. But if you haven't, you can start simple and easy. Start with demographics and then make your way into psychographics, their interest and intent, and eventually their behaviors. Also understand how you will reach them. We reach these people, these personas, through identifiers that can be probabilistic or deterministic. That's the tech side of programmatic. The second highlight I'd like to cover is that there's vast amount of targeting available. David and I covered a few important ones with you. Knowing how each one plays a role and how you can best leverage it. Say for upper funnel prospecting, maybe you want to use third-party targeting. And for lower funnel driving conversions, you can leverage retargeting or lookalike audiences and be smart about how you can layer them on. A good example we covered was layering on an exclusion audience. So you're targeting a retargeting audience of your site visitors, but also excluding people who've already made that purchase or already done the action you're wanting to drive them to. David, you can cover the last one here.
Perfect. And last but not least, my favorite one, always test, test, test. I think this is probably one of those buzzwords we use a lot throughout this webinar, and you've probably heard it a bunch before, but it is super important to do so, specifically with all the different targeting options you have out there. It's important to make sure you're not leaving any stone unturned, and it becomes just something that if you're not tracking all of this sort of thing, you're slacking. So sorry for the corny pun there, but I really do truly believe it. I think one thing to keep in mind when we are testing though is to make sure that you do set fair and even parameters so that your audience is the only variable being tested. I think a lot of times we will change up creative, change up geo sometimes within these tests, but the only way to get a true belief and sense of how an audience performs is to make sure that it is the only variable that is changing between your specific tactics and line items. Cool. Let's jump into the Q&A session. So I'll quickly pop open the question section here. Maybe I'll wait a couple seconds. Oh, I see. Okay, they're starting to come through. Just as a reminder, if you do have any, keep placing them within the questions queue. Just in the sense of timing, we'll go through, I think, about 3 or 4 or 5 of these. And if they don't get answered, we'll definitely make sure that we follow up with some more in-depth answers on them. But I do see a few coming through already. The first one, how will PCA or Page Context AI feature that you mentioned work in a world without third-party cookies? I think I mentioned this, but Page Context AI works essentially in real time. So we actually are not using any cookies in order to target users. And this becomes very important when we think of what a post third-party cookie world could look like. We want to make sure that we are establishing strategies that work effectively now before that happens with our current measurement capabilities and our current ability to gather specific pieces of data, being able to measure what we have in terms of success currently before everything does change, I think is super important. So to answer your question, it will work just the same as it does currently, and all the more reason to make sure that we're testing that as soon as possible. How specific or granular can you get with the geo-targeting in custom segments on StackAdapt? You get pretty granular. If you have a lat long, you can develop a radius. It's essentially just dropping a pin on wherever you want to target or gather users. You can get I think about 100 meters. Sorry for all of the Americans out there, my conversion is terrible from kilometers to miles, but within about a 100-meter radius. I will say just one thing to keep in mind when you are doing that is you want to make sure that your campaign is scalable. So if you are looking to leverage our geo-targeting or location-based segments, make sure that you're building a couple of them just in case one is a little bit too small. You have that backup gathering people within real time, because we run into some instances where if you're trying to gather users that are attending a certain conference or event, it's a one-time event. If you make it too small, then you're kind of out of luck because you can't proactively go back and gather those users. So pretty granular, but make sure that you are keeping in mind that we want to build a scalable targeting solution. Do you offer ABM targeting? Yes, we do. We have a in-house ABM solution, and we also have access to some specific third-party ABM providers. So basically what happens if you want to execute that, for those who don't know, ABM is account-based marketing targeting. You would supply us with a list of organizations, job titles that you'd like to target, and then we would be able to generate an audience based off of that. One cool thing, and I know this is a targeting webinar, but if you leverage StackAdapt's ABM targeting in-house, we actually also have a reporting solution that goes along with it. So not only are you targeting people within a specific industry, job title, so on, we can actually report back on some firmographic data of those individuals. You'll think of things like the size of the organization, of the user that you're able to target, their job function. Sometimes you can get even granular as to like the spend or the revenue of that business. So any B2B targeters out there, ABM should be something that you look into and consider. And StackAdapt does a really good job with both sides, the targeting and the reporting piece of it. Karen, I don't know whether you want to jump in and take one.
Of course. There's a lot of questions coming through. We'll be sure to follow up in an email, but let me pick up the latest one I just saw come through. It asks, are there any view-through conversions we can track with CTV and retarget off of that? Yes, we can. View-through conversions can be tracked through our pixel. After you've placed the StackAdapt pixel on your website, you can track any action. Could be simply a site visit or a button click on the website or a purchase that an audience takes after they've seen your ad on CTV. So yes, we can track view-through conversions. In the interest of time, and given that we do have a lot of questions coming through, we'll be sure to take these away and follow up by email. David, is there anything else you'd like to add? Otherwise, we can wrap it up here.
No, I think that's probably the best plan. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining. That concludes the webinar for today. I hope everybody found it informative. Just as a reminder, like Karen said, we will follow up for all those questions that we were not able to answer. And also you will be getting a recording of everything we went through today. But yeah, thanks again for everybody for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.